So yeah, I just, it's like been so fun. So so Rachelle is here, and you've been made a co-host, so you have the power, Rachelle, if you'd like to say hi and unmute yourself.
That could be dangerous.
And Joan is holding up your book. My book is at home on the coffee table where I'm not now because of the internet
Oh, look
at
at
home
that.
didn't work, and so here I am. But we are so excited to have Rachelle with us today. She has written the current book that we are reading this year, Chart a New Course. And this is your, what, third book this year that you published?
The, the fourth one.
Fourth one. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's it's
It's just the fourth book she's put out this
it's
year,
kind
you
of
guys.
embarrassing. It's a little awkward because that's why people ask me if I sleep or anything, and I'm always yeah. So it was a busy time period in my life, you could say.
Oh,
Uh,
wait, I'm just excited. So part of your homework last night was to look at the five to try at the end of every chapter, just so you kind of had a chance to get into the book. And now Rochelle's going to talk to us a little bit about the book and just all of the things. So we're really, really excited you're here.
Well, thank you. I just finished, well, it's still kind of going on. We're still in school and we had professional development all day, and it was on the computer doing training for career and college. We have this program, so they're trying to train everybody. And it is really tiring to do that. There's so much out there and it can be so overwhelming. And I'm saying that because as I'm sitting through it, the speaker, Zoom, it kept freezing. And they said, can anybody out there just screen share? And so, of course, I was trying to hurry up and screen share. But as I'm working through that, I'm thinking, goodness, somebody needs to write a book about like the 5 ways to get started with this quickly, because they gave us a ton of resources. But even with all of the resources, there is so much to sort through. And that in itself can be overwhelming. And with this book, when I was thinking about ideas for what could I do to make it useful, to have some quick ideas like the 5 to try and things. And I mean, there are so many different tools out there, and it doesn't always have to be technology, because I do love the hands-on learning and the paper and all those projects that students would make. But it's nice that we have all of these different tools that can give students choices. And then, of course, with considerations like, what types of devices do we have? Do we even have devices? Do all of our students have access? So many questions we have to think about first. So being mindful of that with all of these, knowing that not necessarily will they all work really well with your students or a group of teachers that you're working with, but the idea is to just have one place to begin. Don't have to do all the things, even though I know all of us try to always do all of the things, but having one thing to start with and try it out. And if it goes great, then keep on going and add something else to it. And if it doesn't, one thing that I really like to do as well is talk to my students. There have been a lot of times where I decided I had a plan set, and then they came in, and you can kind of just read their faces and their body language, and you just know that whatever your plan is, it's probably not going to go that well. And so I've totally veered from my plan sometimes, and I said, you know what, we're going to try something different. And sometimes I make something up really quickly, and they tell me, you know, Mrs. Poth, that really, what were we supposed to get out of doing that? And oh, well, in my mind, it seemed like a better idea. But then I asked them for suggestions. And so in the book, a lot of the things that kind of come out are their takeaways from it, ideas that I got from them and kind of built upon. And so my hope for anybody who reads it is that, one, you don't have to read it from cover to cover. Just pick an idea to start with that sounds interesting to you. Or maybe, like for me, years ago, I was having a really big problem with student engagement, and I couldn't understand why my students weren't learning, why they didn't seem like they were motivated in my classroom. And then I realized that the problem that I had with student engagement was I didn't understand what student engagement meant. I had totally misunderstood it. And so that was part of, I guess, probably 4 years ago that I really started to focus on student engagement, what I could do differently in my classroom, breaking away from teaching the way that I had been for years. And that's where this kind of evolved from. And so hopefully anybody that picks this up can find some quick ideas to get started with. And even just in passing, if you have a conversation and somebody says, you know, I really wish I could help my students build their skills to collaborate or work on those peer relationships. And you might say, hey, I heard of this idea like learning stations, or maybe you throw out another option, having students work together on some type of cooperative project in your classroom. Even if you haven't done it, it's just the idea of having an idea. And so, Julie, I don't know, I put some slides together of different things, different examples, and I mean, whatever, if anybody has any questions or a specific focus, I'm going to grab a quick drink.
So you are on Eastern time, and so you've already put in a solid day, and you're kind of
It's
wrapping up.
okay.
Um,
No, I got many
so
more hours to go today. It's all good.
I know. So yeah, if you want to share your screen and share the slides, I think that would be awesome. Kind of
Okay.
because just to get a little more feel, and they've been really awesome about chatting their questions in the chat, and so we'll be watching that too. Okay.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I'm going to share, and hopefully you will be able to see. Let me see one second here. Okay. So can you see my about me?
Yes, we sure
Okay.
can.
And I'll just do this kind of quickly because it gives you a little bit of perspective about my experience and how I came to write this book and the other ones. I've been teaching, actually, when I started to teach many years ago, I was teaching French and Spanish. When I graduated Penn State, I was only certified in French and I couldn't get a job teaching. So I went back and got the Spanish certification. And then I got my job where I currently have been teaching at Riverview for over 20 years. And during that time, in the past 5 years, I've also been a STEAM teacher, which when people hear about some of the topics that I teach, like augmented virtual reality, artificial intelligence, they often wonder why a Spanish teacher is doing that. But the reason being, when we got a grant, actually our librarian had submitted for a grant, and our school was awarded one to change our library into more of a STEAM maker space. And so when that happened, I was asked, as being a French and Spanish teacher, to incorporate some different activities into my language classroom, but also to teach a STEAM course. And so I've taught for 8th grade students for the past 5 years on different topics. First it was coding, hummingbird robots, and then the last probably 4 years now, I guess, it has been on emerging technology, but also the basics like digital citizenship and coding we get into a little bit later, but really helping them understand how to use technology, building their social presence, responsible posting. We go over cyber safety, and let's see what else we cover. Topics like when you should post something, when you should not. We look at bullying. I mean, there's a wide range. It's not all about the technology, but helping them to develop some skills that they need for now and in the future. And so I love teaching that class. And then over the time since I said I was studying engagement and realized I need to make some changes, that's where all of the information came from for me to write the books. I started to do some blogging and just shared my experiences in my classroom, hoping to give other educators some ideas, and not specific to languages, but just in general. And then somebody asked me about, oh, well, you write so many blogs, you should put a book together. And I said, well, I don't know what I would write a book about. But anyway, here we are about 2 years almost after that conversation. And the books, there are some similarities between them because it's sharing stories. Two of them share a lot of stories of students. I actually had 2 students who wrote a chapter in 2 of the books. And then I have a lot of educators from different backgrounds and from all over the world who shared stories too. And my hope is that people can read them and get some ideas to quickly start without having to take all of that time to sort through all the resources or to feel overwhelmed or to worry about a huge learning curve. And so that's kind of where it evolved from. And my most recent book, which you are all going to be reading, and thank you for that, is the Chart a New Course. And it does have the 5 chapters. And what I did is I focused on, for my classroom, not necessarily focused on the technology, but just looking at how I was totally wrong about engagement. For example, when I say that is, my students would play a game in our classroom. We do an activity and I would look at them and I would think, wow, they're having so much fun and they're learning and it's going really well. And then when it came time for projects or assessments, whether it's conversations or their writing, they weren't mastering the content. And I couldn't understand why that was happening. I did some research when I got my master's degree and found out what the true meaning of student engagement was and how I could kind of work on that in my classroom. So with all of that, my focus then became, what are ways that I can give students more opportunities to take the lead specifically? Because for me, when I went to high school, when I went to college, I took all of those methods and the activities and everything that my teachers for French did for my classes that worked for me, and I kind of pushed them into my own classroom. And I was afraid to break away from that because in my mind I thought, well, this is working for me or has worked for me, so it should work for my students. But I found out it wasn't. And so I needed to make some changes. And for me at first, that was uncomfortable because my mind was, students need to be lined up in rows. I need to be the one teaching and talking for the whole time. I need to make all the decisions, and they have to do the project the way that I've assigned it. But instead, what I realized is I needed to kind of open that up more and be open to their suggestions, to create more opportunities for me to get out of the way and for them to take the lead more, because to prepare them, I mean, obviously I want them to know Spanish and to be able to have conversations and to use it later in life, because who knows where they will end up eventually. Like for me, taking French in high school, I would have never imagined I'd be a Spanish teacher. But I also realized I need to help them develop other skills that will be applicable to life regardless of where they end up, and to create those opportunities for them. And so thinking about purpose, some of the tools that I've mentioned in the book, and I had to add the plus because I was thinking, what are some of the tools that we use in my classroom that kind of are applicable to all of these different themes that I have in this book? There are some multi-purpose, your one-stop shop that regardless of if you are an elementary, middle school, high school teacher, higher education, or your role, if you're a classroom teacher, you're a tech coach, library media specialist, any other role that you have, like these are tools that we can all make use of and that our students can build all of these vital skills with. And so I often joke that I can't necessarily pick one tool. Sometimes I can't. It depends on what the question is that I'm asked. But I will just show you a couple examples of how I've used this and give you some ideas, and would love to hear your questions or if you have used some of these as well. But I'll just go through the themes of the book and tell you what that might look like. And again, technology is great, but always mindful of what is the purpose, what is it helping me to do differently? And especially now over the past couple of months, people would think, well, you know a lot about technology tools. This was probably really easy for you. And honestly, it was not easy at all. I've never taught a course online. I've taken a lot, but in terms of a high school course to teach it, it was quite difficult. And so it's not about using all of the different tools. It's finding one or two that really enable you to connect with students, to help them to build these different skills that we want to see them develop in our classrooms. And then whenever they go out into the world, they're prepared. And so these are just a few that I'll share with you today. But one of the first theme in the book was team up, and it focused more on social emotional learning skills. And what I loved about the graphic, a friend of mine created this graphic for the book, and I just really liked the way that she captured it. And so if you're looking at those skills, especially now, there's a lot being written, and a lot of resources and webinars are coming out now about how we really need to prepare our students as we end this school year, if we haven't already, and then think about it over the summer as we approach the next school year. And even for teachers too, what are the things that we can engage in that can help us all to build these types of skills? Because these are the skills our students need in our schools, but also for the future. And looking at the World Economic Forum did research and had a projected outlook of the skills that will be necessary in, originally it was 2030, and then they had another one that was in 2022, and they coincide with this. And so if you break them down, I mean, clearly we want our students to build their confidence and for them to be able to be self-aware and understand what their strengths are, and to set new goals and to kind of build along the way. Really important. So there are some non-tech tools that we can use to do this, but also with technology, I have seen students who have really built their skills in this area because they've had a platform where they feel comfortable, for example, doing a video response. Students may not necessarily want to stand up in front of their peers, but when they have a space where they could be at home, record a video, and if they want to re-record the video, they can totally do that. And then sometimes they're fine with that being shown in class because they know they prepared, it's set, it's recorded, they don't have to worry about making mistakes. Emotions and stress and setting goals and all of these other ones that are on the screen and in the image. If you want a good resource, I do give some information in the book as well, but CASEL has, it's casel.org, has tons of resources available for educators. They even added another portion to their website recently. I just noticed it the other day, that's focused on remote learning, remote teaching, and what are some of the things that we can do to prepare for our students and also to support families as we help students to develop these skills. And I'll pause there for 1 second. Julie, I didn't know, did somebody have a question that I could, I always see the chat pop up and then I'm never sure. Oh, good.
No, there haven't been any questions. I shared out your recording to your AR/VR webinar, and that was, and so that was what we were talking about. But that was a while ago. Now
Oh, okay.
now we're engrossed.
Oh, no, thanks. And so what I've seen in my classroom when I mean, a lot of the times we are already doing some of these things that have names. For example, social emotional learning. Years ago, I was having students work together and work on building their peer relationships in class, and then also doing self-assessments, but I wasn't referring to it with the name. And throughout the book, there are some other things like app smashing or blended learning. And sometimes we just do something or personalized learning without actually saying, I'm going to do something as personalized learning. It just kind of happens and evolves over time. And that's another thing that kind of happened with me in my classroom is I saw the disconnect between my students and myself in terms of communication. I also saw the decrease in engagement, and just working on that and trying to brainstorm ideas and come up with new ways to teach in my classroom led me to some of these kind of discoveries that I've shared in this book. And so the first section of the first chapter of the book was focused on social emotional learning skills. And a big way that I did this, and that you can do this as well, or you can set this up if you're working with teachers and with groups of students, it can be for anybody, is through learning stations. And I will recommend, Catlin Tucker has, and her website is there, but I was interviewed by her on a podcast about probably a little over a month or so ago now. And we were talking about student engagement. And when I started to make some changes in my classroom, and I told her that it just happened on one morning in September, probably 5 or so minutes before my students were going to come into my classroom. And I looked around my room, which had rows of desks, and I was thinking about all of the engagement problems that I was having, and realized that the problem was that if students had a question, they were in the back of the room, I was in the front because I moved around, but it was kind of hard because of the number of desks that I couldn't get to them quickly. Or if students in the front had a question and I started talking to them, I would lose the attention of the other students in the back of the room. So that morning, I moved all the desks around into 2s and 3s and 4s, and the students came in, and that's kind of how I started to do station rotations and learning stations in my classroom. And I told Catlin when I spoke with her that I really didn't have a clue about what I was doing. I just knew that what I had been doing in my classroom wasn't working that well, and I just had to change it. But I did read her book, Blended Learning in Action, and looked at her website and watched some videos and everything. And I said, it's way better now than it was. But even the students in the picture, I mean, they're playing, each station had different activities. There are different ways that you can do it. But even in the virtual space, it's kind of hard to imagine. But with Zoom, we have the possibility, if you can do breakout rooms, and I did that with some of my classes while our schools have been closed, so you can kind of facilitate that same activity in the virtual space. It's, of course, way better whenever you're in that physical classroom space. But for my students, the difference was that not probably 2 weeks or so after we had started doing this, and there were challenges because of the timing, and then with students, if they finished earlier, me trying to rotate everything. So it did take a little bit of time to kind of figure out a routine for it in a sense, but I loved it because I got to interact with every student, and I felt like I was teaching every student every day. But I had students after about 2 weeks coming to me and telling me how much more they liked class this year as opposed to the year before, that they didn't feel like they were stuck in the back of the room. They could interact with their classmates. They were able to talk. They were able to ask me questions, and they just felt more involved and connected. And even at the end of that school year, a few students said they felt like they were part of a learning family. And so that for me told me that even though there were some challenges and I could still learn a lot more about how to do this and changes that I could make, that it was a step in the right direction. And so that is big, especially for social emotional learning skills and having students work with other students in the classroom. Because as we all know, sometimes students want to just work with their friends, or I have students who often want to work by themselves. But realistically, in life, there are times we are going to have to work with other people. And so helping them to build those skills, and then even seeing them evolve as leaders, where I didn't have to answer the questions. I was so used to answering questions right away, but seeing the classmates step in and help their peers and all these other skills they're building in the process made a big difference. And so for me and for my students, that was definitely a big step in the right direction. Now, another idea that you can do for building the social emotional learning skills, but collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, I mean, there's so much that you can do with this, are scavenger hunts. And they can be done with just paper and somebody can create them. Or of course, there are always apps out there. One is Goose Chase, but if anybody has ever used Flipgrid, Kathy K, and that's her name, and you can check her out on Twitter, did a flip hunt. And what you do is you use Flipgrid, and there are different tasks for students to do and engage in. And so they work as a team, and it might be finding an object, doing an activity, singing a song. It can be anything tied into your content, but it gets students up and moving. So active learning is good. They're working together. So they're building all of those relationship skills, and they're making decisions about things, how to create something. And it also builds confidence too. So if it's tied into the content, as they're working with their peers to solve something or to contribute to the scavenger hunt, they're building those skills in the content, but in a way that's comfortable to them. And so they have that support, and it's also fun. I did this at the end of a school year a couple of years ago when students had just finished spring sports, the musical, AP exams, and we were preparing for final exams. And I needed to review the content, but I thought I need to do something a little bit differently. And so I did use Goose Chase to create some different scavenger hunts, and students were reviewing. It was all levels of Spanish 1 through 4. I had them for every single class, and they just went out and took part in this scavenger hunt and had pictures, had video, whatever the task was. So there are a lot of options out there. It can be simply done with paper. It can be done with technology. It depends on what your access is. But the end result is it fosters a lot of these skills like collaboration, communication, and engages students a little bit more in learning in a different way. Okay, I'll pause there quickly. Any questions? And I do have, at the end of, in the book, there are Padlets that have a lot of examples kind of tied into the 5 to Try, and I'll show some of those too. I wanted to make sure that, got to look at those.
Oh, good. Yeah, no, we a number of the books. Oh, Catlin Tucker, we have a couple of her books in our professional development e-library. We've got some stations. It's been, we're excited.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, create and connect. And for me as a Spanish teacher for years, when I think back to my language learning experience in high school, I remember writing a letter to a pen pal and hoping that the letter would come back. And most of the time that didn't happen. But as a language teacher, I mean, just even anybody now, we really need to focus on helping our students to build these different connections and learn on a global scale, but also to connect in the physical space as well as the virtual space. And what I've seen a lot from my students is that when I've used some of these different tools available, for example, Flipgrid is one, there's another one that was called Recap at the time, but giving them that space where they could record their Spanish, do their presentation, record it. If they didn't like how it sounded, do it over again, and then have it presented in class. Also to engage in peer feedback, which can be uncomfortable, but giving them a space where they have that support, they build the relationships, they also can choose what they are using to create something. And it's amazing with all the different tools that are out there that, like I said, sometimes you just pick one and you can meet, for example, all of the ISTE standards with just one tool, or you can have students build the 4 C's, or in some cases we have like the 5 C's. I've even seen the 7 C's now. So they're always expanding, but it's nice when you can find a tool or a strategy that enables you to do a lot. And one that is my go-to is Buncee. And especially during this remote time, remote learning, in my school, we don't have a tech coach. And since I have done a lot with technology, I was trying to help, especially some of the elementary teachers who it was Friday the 13th, left school and knew that we were going to be home for a 2-week period initially, but then weren't sure if we were going to be coming back. And so for them, trying to figure out how to keep doing the same things that they have been doing. I mean, all teachers, but for elementary, focusing on how do I pronounce words for my students, or do read alouds, or I always greet them in a certain way, all of these kind of concerns that they had. And so after some conversations with them, the tool that came into mind all the time was Buncee, because of all the different ways that you can use it. Now, in my experience, we have used it for students at the beginning of the year to do an about me. And so icebreakers, some people love them, some people not so much. And I know for my Spanish classes, a couple of years ago, I decided to start every single year with doing some just random icebreakers that I would make up, because I wanted them to be comfortable with their classmates and build that first, because I didn't want them to feel like they couldn't respond, they couldn't speak in the language, or any of those things that they might feel uncomfortable about doing. And so I used Buncee to have students create an about me. And I wanted them, because you can record a video in it. As a teacher, I can also create a message and share it with my students, which I can even share how I did that during remote learning. But we also used it for project-based learning. And the picture that you can see on the screen on the top right, and there are some references to this in the book about our whole our project-based learning experience, which was another thing that I completely misunderstood. I thought I was doing PBL for years. People would ask me, are you doing project-based learning? And I would say yes. But then I realized I was doing learning based on projects, and did some research and realized, okay, totally different thing, and started to really focus on doing this in my Spanish 3 and 4 class. But I wanted them to connect with other classrooms that, for example, we connected with students in Argentina and in Spain. And when we did that, we started with Edmodo and connected with those classrooms. And then over a period of the first year, my students would create and share information about lives of students here in the United States, what it's like to live in Pittsburgh, what their activities are. And they did that by creating an About Me Buncee that they posted on what's called a Buncee board, if anybody has not heard of Buncee. And so we sent that to the students in Argentina and Spain. And when they saw that, they could look at it and realize the differences between students here and students there. But then they were so excited about what they saw that they decided to make their own Buncees and share them back with us. So the students were creating, but then they were also connecting with other students in other parts of the world, which was a really great experience for all of us. So that was the first thing. Also, teachers can create lessons with this, and it's fun just to make, flyers, newsletters, you can do anything with it. And when I say, if you can have one tool that does everything or most everything, this is one that I refer to all the time, because you really can. And for elementary teachers who were trying to do a lot of lessons and send greetings to their students and do check-ins, they were able to do that within this platform. And since it integrates with a lot of other tools, that's another nice feature, is when you have something that everybody can access. And let me just skip this one here. So this is what it would look like. I made my own because I figured if I'm going to ask my students to do something, I should also do that same thing. And I recorded a video of myself saying, this is who I am, this is my experience, and talking about me, which even though I do speak and do webinars and I'm a teacher, I still feel that sense of like, I'm kind of uncomfortable doing this because I'm recording myself, but it's a good experience because I'm going to be asking my students to do that. So I created my own, had the video, shared it with them, and then they made up their own as well. And that was one of the first things that we did at the beginning of the year in Spanish 1, but also that we do throughout the year with different focus points. But there are so many ideas that you can use this for. And I gave you a few. I gave you a quick 5 there that you could do if you wanted to create something. Digital business card is kind of fun to do as well. But even for icebreakers and building social emotional learning skills and having students connect, sometimes doing those 3 truths and a lie. There's some that are like things I wish my teacher knew, or things that you don't know about me. There's a lot of different templates. So it's great for students to create on a lot of different topics, but also to be able to add that personal touch with a video or with an audio, or even just a picture that you add into it. Okay, so pausing there. And some of this kind of, you'll see there's an overlap through a lot of this, because you might look at one tool and think, wow, I could use it for all 5 of these themes, for example. Or you may see some of the tools kind of repeat throughout. which is why I say, like, yeah, if you can find that one tool, if these are your 5 goals and you can find one tool or two that can meet all of those goals, then I think that's really where the power is. Yeah. Anything, Julie?
Yes, yes. We have a question about does Buncee cost?
Yes, there are 5, I believe, levels of it. So as an individual, you can, I want to say 3, you can create 3 Buncees. Then there is an individual classroom teacher that you can create, I think, unlimited Buncees. If you're just sharing them with students, with families, newsletters, I have a lot of examples that I can share to, administrators are sending newsletters out. Principals are doing morning announcements. There is Shannon Miller has a virtual, I forget what it's called now, but it has a lot of different books and a book challenge. And then there are other levels. So as a classroom teacher, I have a classroom account where I can have students in my dashboard. But if you just want to make a few just to try it out, it does not cost. You can have a free account.
I added the pricing to the blog or to the
Okay.
list so you can check it out, or to the resources.
Okay. Thank you. And that was it for now. Yeah, and I can also tell you the ones that are free, because somebody had asked me that before too. They said, could you let us know which ones are free? And I do like the free tools, especially now with schools as they close, and all of these companies were offering the free tools, but trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to still be able to use into the next school year? And so having different options, and it is nice that you can just to even explore. A lot of them, the pricing is not altogether too bad, depending on what's all included with it. And especially if, my school, we have Microsoft Teams, or if you're, say, Google Classroom, where those tools kind of interact with it. So you can kind of connect it with what you're covering and your classroom space a lot more easily. And so tying in with the other chapter, Global Connections, I kind of touched on this with the project-based learning. But there are a lot of ways out there to connect our students with other students and for them to learn about the world beyond the community that they live in. And so this is something that I kind of was doing earlier on in my career, but I wasn't doing it at the level that I should have been, which I did try to get them to have pen pals, for example, and we were learning about different places where Spanish was spoken, and students were presenting on different topics and exploring different cultures and the language, and really getting to understand the history and all of the different components of it besides just the language. But it wasn't until probably 5 years ago now that I went to Edmodo headquarters, actually, to speak for EdmodoCon, and had conversations with some of the teachers there from around the world. And I realized that I really needed to set up that space for my students to connect, to learn in a more authentic way. And so I reached out to a couple teachers, we connected our students, and used Edmodo as our place to kind of correspond back and forth. And of course, now we know we have so many different platforms that we can do that with. Anybody who is on Facebook, there are so many communities. Even on Twitter, you can reach out. And then some of the different digital tools or ed tech companies have their own programs where they connect classrooms as well. And so from when I started teaching to maybe 10 years ago to now, there really are opportunities everywhere. But in setting up these global connections, these are some of the things that I noticed came out of that. For my students, of course, like I said, I want them to learn the Spanish language, but I also want them to build vital skills that will help them beyond our school. And when, a few years down the road, when they're still kind of figuring out what they're going to do beyond high school, beyond college, if they've gone that route. And for our project-based learning, which was the biggest component of this, we started, and it was with Edmodo. And so on the screen in the top, it was just the conversation in that space between my students and myself and the teacher in Argentina. And that went on for about 2 months. And then after that, my students were asking questions. They were exploring different topics for their project-based learning. And then after that, I thought it would be really nice if we could actually have conversations. And so then that's when I brought in Flipgrid. And I remember the first time that we got the video back from those students in Argentina, and my students were so excited because they were seeing the person who they had already been corresponding with through Edmodo and learning about what life is like as a teenager in Argentina. And so there was so much excitement behind that. and the power of technology, thinking like, wow, we are so far apart, but yet here we have this free platform that we can exchange videos and have access to them right away. And so there are many ways to use that, but we kind of kept leveling up, I guess you could say. So it went from the Edmodo, just a conversation. We did the video with Flipgrid. We had the Buncee where they created the About Me and made the visuals, and then taught those students in Argentina and Spain about this tool, and then created this kind of learning community in that space. And then the next part of that was we used Nearpod, because my students in Spanish 4 at the time said, it would be really fun if the students from Argentina came to Pittsburgh. And they said, do you think they'll come? And I said, well, I don't know that that's actually possible right now. Why don't you plan a trip for them and see what they think? And we wanted to kind of collaborate. So what I did is we set up a Google Slides, and the students were able to work on it together. And then using my Nearpod account, they were able, because there's a Chrome extension, to change the Google Slides into a Nearpod, which is what you see on the top right. And then there are slides that had pictures from Pittsburgh or whatever they put in for their project. Then they were able to add in different activities like a virtual field trip or a poll, like what would you like to visit when you come to the city, or what types of food would you like? And another thing that was interesting happened after that as well. We sent that to the students in Argentina. They worked through the lesson, so we were able to see what their responses were, but then they made their own lesson and had a welcome to Argentina, and did the same thing for my students in my class. And it was just really amazing. As the year progressed, we kept building and adding on different tools and collaborating different ways. And my students really enjoyed that experience and said that they had never learned in that way before. Being able to ask direct questions to the students, first just in that space on Edmodo, but then hearing the voices, seeing the way they dressed, hearing their accents, made that a more personal connection. It was more meaningful for them. And so lots of these tools. Now, if you think back to social emotional learning and having students create and connect, these again are good options to do that with. Even with Nearpod, I've had students who, for their project-based learning presentation, where they can do whatever they want to share their information. I've had some who have created their own Nearpod lesson because they really want it to be interactive and to engage their classmates in the learning experience with them. And these are just some screenshots of how students chose to do their project-based learning. And the one in the middle is a Padlet, but it really didn't matter. But the topics that they chose, when I did this, I didn't choose the topic for them. I said, I want you to explore something that you're interested in. I want it to be connected to the Sustainable Development Goals, and look at issues on a global scale, also looking locally to find out about some things and make a connection. And so I had students who were interested in sports, who were interested in foods and the culture, but then I had some who were involved in some different clubs in our school that wanted to learn more about civil rights and religion, and some of them wanted to learn about gender inequality in different Latin American countries, for example. And so giving them the choice of how to create and how to share that in whatever way that they felt most comfortable or that was interesting to them, getting all of their projects back and then being able to share that with all of the students really was a meaningful learning experience that I've said this to them over the years, and some of them are going to be entering their sophomore or junior year in college now, and we still talk about it. And they've actually, there are students in the book who went with me to different conferences over the years and presented, but they've all said that this was amazing for them to learn in this way. And I tell them that there is no way that I could have given them that same learning experience if we didn't have this project-based learning. Like, they were the ones that were leading, creating, and teaching, and I learned so much from them. I was just amazed through the whole process, and only wish that I would have started earlier, although I didn't actually realize I wasn't doing the project-based learning. When we look at collaborations, Flipgrid, as I mentioned before, has a lot of possibilities for all of these themes, but learning on a global scale, if you go to Flipgrid, they have grid pals, and you can look at the map and find somebody who is located near you or somebody around the world, and connect your classrooms with another classroom, connect your classrooms together, and have students share ideas or talk about what it's like to live in your city or to go to school, or what family life is like, for example. But to have that space where you can have those conversations. And I know over the past couple of months, I've really missed the opportunity to talk with my students. And even though I've had some classes where each class I've held 2 meetings per week, they're not mandatory because not all students had access, but I wanted to be available. Being able to at least connect with the students to hear each other's voices, but I didn't have all students joining in. And so using Flipgrid, even though it's an asynchronous connection, hearing their voice, for them to be able to hear me giving them some feedback, but also to be able to connect and hear ideas from their classmates really did make a difference. And so looking at all of the skills that we need to build, Flipgrid is another one of those tools that you can really add a lot to it. And it is a free tool. It does connect right in with Microsoft. So if you are in a school that uses Microsoft, it is one of those apps that you can add into it. But there are other things that you can add to the lesson as well. And all of these, you don't have to start from scratch. That's another nice thing. There's always tons of sharing in these different communities that exist. And if you're short of ideas, I mean, I'm happy to point you in a direction of somebody that might be in your same role or might have done something that you're looking to do with your students or with your teachers, for example. And so that's Flipgrid. And I'll pause there for a minute. But if you are looking at the 5 to try in each chapter and you go to one of them, for example, like in about augmented virtual reality, or if you pick a digital storytelling tool, there are, of course, with AR, VR, we have the technology. In digital storytelling, we've got the digital, so the technology. But I've had students who have said, well, why can't I just draw? Why do I have to use technology? For example, in my Spanish 2 class, I wanted them, because they had been asking me, why can't we do the AR, VR? Why is it only your 8th grade STEAM class? And I didn't have an answer for that. I just, in my mind, didn't see that I could bring that into my Spanish language classroom. And so I gave it a go at one point, and I noticed that when they were learning, they were working with their classmates on a project together. They were building skills beyond just the Spanish. They were collaborating, digital citizenship, but they were also building their social emotional learning skills. And I didn't see that initially. I was just seeing, how can I have them practice this content in a way that's more engaging, that they'll retain it for a longer period of time. But I did have students who said, why do I have to use technology? And I said, well, you know what, we can kind of work around this. And so I had some students who drew a picture and wrote all of the dialogue and everything that they needed underneath the picture. But then we used an app that could bring it to life, basically, and put a couple characters on it. So I wanted them to have the experience. And I said, you know what, let's come to a compromise. I said, I really want to try out this other app that I found out about. And I don't want to use a drawing because I'm not that great at art. But if you do the drawing and then I can kind of help you with this, let's see how it turns out. And so that was a really good experience. But for me, for years, giving students projects to do, I always gave them the structure and I wasn't really open to their different ideas until probably maybe 7 years ago at this time, that I got away from it being so structured and said, okay, how would you like to show me what you know? And so in this section, these are just some of the examples of things that I have used. And for some students, it was even just using Padlet, for example. If anybody has ever used Padlet, you probably know there are so many ways that you can use it for saving information. I have some listed here, even for a scavenger hunt, which I did with my students in a Zoom breakout room a couple of weeks ago. But one of my students, for her project-based learning, made her own Padlet, and that's the image that you see on the top right. And what she did was she put her articles and she recorded 5 different video clips as she was working through it of the thoughts that she had about her topic. And she was looking at at tolerance in terms of social and cultural and religious tolerance in the world between actually United States and in Spanish-speaking countries. And for her, she just wanted a space where if people wanted to find out about it, they didn't have to look through a lot of different slides or anything. She wanted them to actually hear her thoughts. And I didn't tell her to do that, but we had been using Padlet to store projects, and she created that. And I thought that was a really unique way to do that and a way that other people could learn from. But with Padlet, if students want to use their own space like that, there are a lot of features you can use in it. You can use it for free. I forget what the number is. It's a limit, but if you have been using it for years, then you have a higher limit on the free end of it. But other tools that are out there you can do the same thing with is one like Wakelet. And I used Padlet in the book, and I'll show you some examples of where I stored some extra materials that tie into each of the 5 chapters. But a lot of choices that you can use for it. And then another thing in terms of showing what you know, sometimes it's just a conversation or having students talk about it. And a tool that I've used besides Flipgrid is Synth. And if anybody had ever heard of a tool called Recap a couple of years ago, it was available around the same time as Flipgrid, but then they changed it to now be a podcasting tool called Synth. And if you look it up, it's GoSynth. But I would ask students some questions. We use this also for project-based learning. And so the students in Argentina, and actually on the bottom right here is a picture of the teacher from Spain, her students would also be able to have conversations with my students. Or I could ask my students a question as a prompt, and they could just share their thoughts, or they could speak in Spanish, and it was a different way. It didn't have to be in writing or some big project. It could have just been a conversation or a different way for them to show what they had learned. And these are just varying examples that I wanted to throw together for students. I've had some who, like I said, just wanted to draw, but had the type, or they used not a typewriter. I mean, that's back when I was in school, but they would type it out and then they drew the characters of the story. Or I had another student who created a lesson to share with her Spanish 3 class, and she used Padlet because it was easier to put that on there. Some students wanted to make videos. Others wanted to make a storybook with Storybird, and we actually had some of them printed into a soft cover and hardcover in our classroom. And then some wanted to do infographics, but the idea was I left it up to them to have a choice. What do you want to try to do and to create, to share what you have learned, instead of me telling you the exact same project or style that I want you to give that to me. And over from my class has everything in rows to now, these are just some of the pictures of what you would see in my classroom, which for me for a while was uncomfortable. Now, if you're working with teachers and working with students, giving them opportunities to work together or explore one of these tools that are at the end of each chapter, or on the Padlet, which I'll share here in a minute, but just getting them to work and collaborate together, because learning, it should be social, which that's not something that I knew for a very long time of my teaching. And let me hit escape here for 1 second and show you a couple Padlets. This is how I organized my class for the period of time when our school was closed. We were not fully using Microsoft Teams, and since I teach 5 different courses, I wanted my students to be able to access everything in one space. So Padlet really has a lot of uses, and that's why I decided to use it to share some of the resources for the book. And if I go to Padlet for chapter 1, I can actually drop this into the chat if you wanted to see it.
And yes, this will be awesome. All right, quick question.
Yeah.
Joan asked, do your students have one-to-one devices?
No, it varies. We have a program where students can get a netbook to use in grades 9 through 12, and they pay in for part of that. Some students have their own device. We do have some older laptops and some iPads available, but it's not one-to-one. I think that's the plan for the next year, just with the uncertainty of school and where it will take place.
Totally. No, that makes sense. Oh, I can't wait to look at your Padlet.
Yeah, so this one goes with, there's a Padlet for each chapter. So this one goes with chapter 1, and a lot of the resources that are in each chapter are on here, but then I also added some additional materials or videos. Just as an example, if anybody knows Mary Alice Curran, does a lot of work with digital citizenship and is affiliated with ISTE. So I placed some things on here and tried to organize it. So if you were looking for specific sites or topics, so the first chapter is that one, and I can drop in the second one. And I do continue to add different resources to this and make sure that it's up to date. So there's chapter 2, and social emotional learning. And so there was actually a blog written about social emotional learning and digital leadership with Buncee. And if anybody knows Jennifer Castle-Todd, she wrote a book on social media and also does work with ISTE. Her and a friend of mine, Mandy Freilich, wrote a blog about social emotional learning. And so shared some of these, some images, and then students also wrote some blogs about their experiences too, which I thought was pretty awesome that they did that. And let me pull up one more here. I have so many Padlets. My students would often say, you have hundreds of Padlets within each Padlet. And I said, yes, that's
That's how you organize.
it
Um,
is.
we have another question here. Erin would like to know, do you show students all these platforms, or do they research themselves when they are picking their projects? Or, so basically, and
Yeah.
that's to kind of add my own 2 cents on that. Do you demonstrate the platforms and kind of teach them ahead of time? Do you tell them, oh, here are some options, or find your own? How in depth do you
Yeah,
go?
it's kind of all of the above. It just depends. With my STEAM course, a lot of the time I will demonstrate it for them with the different tools that we're using. With Spanish, I usually send them or share an example with them. So when they had to do the Buncee about me at the beginning of the year, for example, I had created mine and I shared it with them. And then I usually give them a day or two in class to work on it, and some there to help. Sometimes I give them some options and tell them to go and like check it out on their own first. And then of course I will help them. It just depends. But there are some, we don't use all of the tools all of the time, but throughout the year, I do focus on, okay, I want them all to use Buncee because they can put all of these things into it. Or I want them to build a lesson with Nearpod, my juniors and seniors, because this is something they can use beyond high school. They can create a presentation and have it be more interactive, for example.
Okay, that's helpful. And that's something that I think we, it's hard to know, how much you can just throw at the kids sometimes and say, oh, hey, here's some options.
Hmm.
And then on the other hand, making sure that we provide that support.
Right. And part of it too is when I try a different tool, I sometimes look at if there's a video or tutorial, but often I really just want to kind of go through it on my own because I want to feel like I have that student experience, what they might come up against or what challenges they might encounter during it. And it helps me to kind of, I don't want to say unlearn, but learn and then unlearn a little bit, if that makes sense. But I make sure that I understand the tool. And sometimes I really just want them to explore it because I know that later on in life, they might be asked to do something if it's at their job or another school, or they might not have that support. I know even when I got my master's degree, which came way after, I don't know if I told you when we talked the other day or not, but I had the bachelor's and I taught for a while after I got the Spanish. And then I decided to go to law school while teaching. And then I think it was 7 or 8 years after that I ended up getting my master's in instructional technology. But I remember having to do a Photoshop project my first semester, and it was an online course and it was mostly asynchronous. And so it was really difficult because I didn't have the software. And then when I got the software, it only worked on my computer at school. And so during the school day, how much time do I have to work on that? And I didn't have anybody to help me figure it out. I mean, the videos really didn't help. I needed somebody there, but I had to work through that struggle on my own. And so I know that there may be a time where the students will have that same experience. And so what do they do?
And I really am glad you talked about that, and kind of how you do it. So you don't become an expert on something, but you do look at it and make sure that, you can say, oh, there might be questions about this or about that, so that you can kind of help direct. I think a lot about Richard Byrne. He talks about how he pick stuff to share on free technology for teachers. He's like, yeah, if it takes him longer than 5 minutes to figure it out, he's like, I don't use it because nobody has that much time. And so this kind of goes along with that, in that, you go in, you look at it, make sure it isn't, it's not super confusing.
Mhm.
You can, project questions potentially, and then, turn the kids loose, because yes, that figuring out is huge.
It is. Yeah. And you don't have to be an expert. I say that all the time. I say, number one, I am not an expert, but you don't have to. You just need to know enough about it. I mean, the safety, the privacy, all of that of course, what types of devices do you need for it, but then give the students a chance to explore on their own and go in their own directions with it, because then they come back, or the teachers, if you're training teachers as well, and they come back with new ideas, or they learn and they teach you that much faster. At least in my experience, I love learning from the students. And I say, oh, like even with synth, I had students who recorded and I watched it and I said, how'd you get the video in there? And they said, well, you hit the camera button on the bottom. And I said, oh, they said, you didn't know that? I said, no. And they said, well, we thought you knew everything. I said, no, I don't. But it was fun that they taught me that. So
That's awesome.
yeah. Any
So
other?
so do you guys have any questions? I mean, there's been some really good questions. We're in awe of all the Padlets. I think we've probably lost them all.
Well, you know what? It's really a couple things. If you would type in Padlet and then I'm very consistent with my Twitter handle and everything. It's rdene915. Or if you would just keep one of them, the end address, I just changed it. So chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 5, it's consistent. So if you keep one, you just have to change the number at the end of the URL at the address, and it'll take you to the next chapter.
I already did it. You're working with librarians here.
I tell you what, I had a talk with somebody the other day about, it was artificial intelligence and just giving examples and talking about Google searches. And I said, I'm just amazed now how much you can find. I said, because my whole experience was go to the card catalog, look up the number, figure out where on the shelves this big number was, the Dewey Decimal System. And I couldn't, it's just, I don't know. It's amazing what we can do now with technology, but I spent a lot of time in the library growing up. It was one of my favorite things to do, was to go do research and to pick out books.
Yes, the library, yes. So guys, do you have any questions as we're kind of wrapping up with Rachelle?
Yeah, there's a lot on there. And I mean, if anybody has questions, feel free to send me an email or send me a message on Twitter at any time. Be happy to share anything. And if I don't know the answer, I will connect you with somebody that has the answer.
All right, so kind of watching the chat. It doesn't look like there's much popping up. Oh, here we go. Ron actually, and Ron has been doing some work in Wyoming on AR, VR, and he's been tasked with learning more about it. So he wants to know, how did you start with VR and what products did you use?
I started with, let's see here. I was going to pull up this, if I can find it quick. There we go. So I just did an article the other day that had some different tools, but I started with it about 4 years ago. And the first tool that I used with AR VR was Nearpod. And let me just drop that in there. Okay, was Nearpod. And that was my students. A couple of them were like, we have to use technology. What's this? And they were doing a project, and one of them, who was really pushing back against technology, ended up using Nearpod to make his own camping trip project with Nearpod, because he could pull in the virtual field trips. So I started with Nearpod, and then a good friend of mine, Jamie Donnelly, who has AR, VR, and EDU. That's her website. She wrote the book Learning Transported with ISTE. She has another one she's working on. Over the years, we've just been connecting and doing presentations together. And a lot of the tools, when I got my new iPad a couple of years ago, I just started to look at some of the apps out there. But then there are some that Jamie, in her chats on Wednesday nights, that she always has a new idea, or when she'll send me a message and say, hey Rachelle, I found this new app, do you want to try it with your students? And so we would just kind of start with that. So I used Nearpod, CoSpaces was another one, Metaverse was another one, and then there are some, this blog that I dropped the link in, I wrote, I forget how long ago I wrote it now, but just came out the other day. But it has some really quick ideas to get started with AR and VR. And then also has a link to Jamie's information if you want to check it out. And actually, it's Wednesday night, and she should be having her chat tonight. It's 9 Eastern. but I have written a couple other articles on AR, VR, and there's some on my blog too, but really just exploring one of them and not having to create a lot. So Nearpod is a good way to go if you want to take students on a trip somewhere and add in some different activities and have them explore. But as far as creation, even on your phone, there are some, my favorite app is, it's Figment AR, which it's honestly AR VR, because you can put a portal in and walk into a portal. So that one's a lot of fun. And there's another one called Catchy Words AR. It's kind of a word game, and a bubble appears and the letters are there, and you have to kind of break the bubble with your device and grab the letters and put them into the space to solve a puzzle. But even Google Expeditions, if you're looking at free, Google Expeditions is free, and there are so many different tours that you can choose and have students engage in. They don't even need to use the headset, because some students get that motion sickness, but there are enough that are free out there. And of course there are some that are free and have the paid content as well.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So we looked at Class VR. Have you ever used their products before?
I have not. I have a friend who would often present on Class VR, but I never used it. No, I wasn't sure about the cost of it either.
Right.
Yeah, sorry about that. I've used Google Cardboard, and I bought my own Oculus Go headsets and took those into my classroom. And then I had the favorite headset-wise is Merge, because they're foamy. And that's another one I should have said, the Merge. I mean, I got the Merge Cube here. This one is fun. You can even go to their site and print your own copy. It'll use a lot of ink, but then get the app. If you want to try it out at home to see what they have available, that's also a good option too.
Okay. So the Oculus headsets, you use that with Nearpod, is that correct?
No, Oculus Go it's a standalone. So you put the app and you run it on your phone, and then you don't need the phone in the device. You kind of navigate it. Nearpod, it's just, students could open it up on their phone and then put it into a headset. They don't have to, but it works on any device. I mean, even on your desktop or on your Chromebook, it would work. And but other ones like CoSpaces, and with Merge, you can use the headset too if you really want to do like the hands-off kind of looking at it. But again, some of my students really get like, it's making me not feel well because of the movement. And I said, well, that's because you're walking around the room too fast.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out which, kind of headsets to get, because not all our kids out there where I'm at have cell phones and that kind of thing. So just trying to balance what they have versus what we can provide.
Yeah, and I know when I got my Merge headsets, the nice thing about them is I wish I would have had one down here, larger, foamy. So when you're looking at cleaning them, especially the Google Cardboards, those were not cost effective and you couldn't clean them. But in the Google, if you remember the old ViewMaster clicking through, that was the one I had too, but those didn't always fit the size of the phones the students had. But the Merge, because it's foamy, it also has straps that you can put it on, so it's fully head mounted, so you get more of an immersive experience. But I think they used to be originally $60, and at varying times they were on special. I think I picked up a few even at one point for $18, which the Google Cardboards were $15 on Amazon when I got it. And I thought, I'm not going to spend $15 on cardboard that I can't clean when even if I spent $30 or $45, the length of time that it would last, I definitely recommend out of those, I would definitely recommend the Merge.
All right. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So awesome. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us. We're excited to read your book, and also being able to, get your ideas and I've added a ton of links under on the agenda. So there's a ton of stuff on the agenda. So all the Padlets are linked, and all of the blogs and the other books that you've recommended and everything. So we've been, this is great.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'm very thankful for you and for everybody that's joining in on this. And I would love to hear what you think of the book. And definitely, I'm excited about the pictures of my students in it, because just over the years when I was last year when I was putting this together and seeing their pictures, and now they're, freshmen in college or so forth. And I don't know, it just brings back all the good memories of, wow, I remember when I first started that, and how's this going to go? But then knowing now after like, oh yeah, it eventually, it went really well and the benefits of it. So it's fun to look at. And my 8th grade students doing actually on page, cause I had the book sitting here too, page 79. If you go to page 79, that if you happen to have it, there are 2 pictures there, and that's the app Figment, where you can put up a portal that looks like a frame. And if you go into it and then you turn around, you are in the portal. So you no longer see your physical space. And so those 2 girls were making theirs, but what you can't see is there was one of the boy students in the back of the room on the floor saying, Mrs. Poth, can you please help me? I'm in a portal and I can't get out. And I said, you're just laying on the floor in the classroom. You are not in a portal. And the girls were like, he's just being ridiculous. But you can see in the picture on the left, there's a frame. And if you walk into it, now the more that you create, you got to kind of find it out. I do have some videos I put on YouTube that show it. It's amazing. But those 2 girls actually contributed a story, like a short excerpt at the bottom. I think it's somewhere in that chapter where they talked about the benefits. And so they're 8th grade. So I was very thankful to have them join in. So
That's awesome.
it's fun. Yeah, it's fun to see what they do with it.
That's what I'm always just so excited by when we give them the opportunities and the choice, and to pick that. Really, a lot of times they'll do more work than we even expected of them,
Right.
because they're so engaged.
I know. Totally agree.
All right, crew. So if you guys want to applaud for this current for Rachelle, and we will. I'm sure you'll be seeing our tweets or our
Yeah.
posts on your book as we go.
Make sure you tag me. I hate to miss, because I always feel bad when I miss something, and I try to keep up with it. Although it'll be a little bit easier now because the school year is winding down, and so yeah.